Hello, Lisa.
Hi, Alex. Hi, everyone.
What's been going on with us? Oh, hang on. Welcome to the Be Sober podcast, everybody. Sorry about that. What's been going on with us? We haven't done one of these for ages again.
We haven't, and I'm really, really sorry, guys. We've had a lot of life stuff going on, which we will tell you about in another podcast. But today we haven't actually got time because we have got a guest coming very soon.
But also, this podcast got postponed, didn't it? Which is why we're slightly out of sync because it should have been last week.
Yeah, which is so funny. Well, 2 weeks
Yeah.
ago, it should have been 2 weeks ago. And this podcast today we are doing with James Brown, and it's all about ADHD. So the fact that we had to postpone it because people are double booked and not got the right day and what have you, is quite funny, isn't it? Really, typical
It is a little bit.
ADHD.
Yeah, it is a little bit. Can I just add that it wasn't Lisa? Do you remember a few weeks ago in our podcast when I said that something had happened in lockdown and there was some fashionable thing of where to have drinks? You know, when everyone was having drinks on Zoom
All right, yeah.
at work. Quarantinies.
The name, yes, I
Yeah, it was
remember.
quarantinies. I've had like 4 week long brain fog. And then I was walking the other day with the dog and I saw something about quarantine and I was like, quarantinies. I had to
Yeah, I
write it down.
remember.
Yeah, quarantine is. So I've just been having a conversation with one of our Be Fitters.
Yeah.
By the way, Be Fit, if you're listening to this around now, it's 5. Happy birthday, Be Fit.
Oh, it's 5 years.
Yeah, 5 years. It was around about the 10th of November, 5 years ago. So
Wow, that's incredible. 5 years.
have you heard me around about the 10th of November? Like I didn't know it's the 10th of November.
So for anybody that doesn't know, I'm just going to pop this in. So Be Fit is something that you get as part of being a member of Be Sober. So Alex does 3 fitness sessions every single week, Monday, Wednesday and Fridays. And people come along and
On Zoom.
Yeah, not in real life.
Okay.
Fittinis. The Be Fittinis, because that's how it started.
It actually did start. Well, it was before lockdown, it actually started, but it continued.
Yeah, I did a good few years of Be Fit.
Yeah. Well, other than holidays, that means I've been consistently exercising for 5 years.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, I am quite impressed. So I've been having this chat anyway with one of our Be Fit members. And she was just saying that at a local church, they're doing gin and nibbles. And I was like, don't even get me started because it's infuriating. Do you remember, was it last year that we did hymns and pims? And I was like,
I think it's really bad, mate.
Yeah, well, in the congregations then, in every service, it was actually said by our vicar and non-alcoholic options. So I think we really need to be rethinking this, don't we?
We do.
No, people.
Oh,
People
yeah,
need to
we
be
don't. We
not
know
us.
how
No,
we
we're
should
right.
go.
Lisa James is here. Should we let him in?
Yeah, it would be a good idea. You know what? I'm going to have to get in podcast mind because we never record one on a Monday, and I've got
We
Monday
really don't.
mind.
Hello,
Hi,
James.
James. How are you?
Hi, guys. Just checking you can hear me. Is that all right?
Yeah, we can. We can hear you. We can see you. It's great.
Lovely. I'm so sorry I've messed you around with this, but it's been such a weird couple of weeks, honestly.
It's all right. Don't worry.
So
We've had it a bit weird ourselves, to be honest.
Yeah, we actually have, and we just said how funny it is that even though we're going to be talking about ADHD today, that should happen on an ADHD podcast. That it gets postponed. There's no surprises, is there really?
No. There's never any surprises in my life, guys.
So I'm going to kick it straight. Well, actually, no, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself first, but then I want to kick it straight off with a real controversial. It's not my opinion, but something that I hear a lot. So go on, let's introduce you first, James.
What is this recording? Is it?
Oh, it is. Yeah,
we go straight away.
Right.
We don't mess around, you know. We haven't got time for editing or patience.
No messing around, nothing like that.
Only the real stuff here. There's no editing either. So if you cock up, that's it. We're in. We're done. We don't mess about.
I'm used to that. Don't worry. Okay. Well, I suppose I'm James Brown, co-founder of the UK charity ADHDadultUK and least popular host of the ADHD Adults podcast. And I do other stuff as well, like we've written a book and I coach and blah, blah, blah. But that's me.
Fantastic. I'm going to start off really controversially. Lisa, she won't mind me saying, she's sat here, but she won't mind me saying, Lisa's got a formal ADHD diagnosis. I'm forever being told that I have ADHD or autism or both by anybody who feels they can have an opinion. And I've had it said that everybody's got a bit of ADHD. What do you think to that?
See,
A
the
bit
thing
of
is,
ADHD, first off. Let's go there.
The thing is, I like to, even as a grumpy bastard, I like to use positive intent, and that means assume that most people are kind of being positive when they say stuff. Now, they're not always, but often when that's said, it might come from a place of empathy. It might mean that people are trying to understand someone's lived experience or trying to show a sense of kind of shared experience, but it often comes across as diminishing. Like, well, yeah, but we all do that. Now, technically, with an asterisk, the traits of ADHD do exist throughout the whole of society. We're all occasionally impulsive. We all, if you look at the diagnostic criteria, we all occasionally make mistakes. We all occasionally forget things or lose things. We all occasionally interrupt people or maybe struggle to wait our turn. But the difference is, if you do those things occasionally, they can sometimes be a positive. You know, if you're impulsive and say something funny, then everyone laughs and thinks, oh, that's great. If you're doing it every day, if you're doing it to the point where it's not just making the odd careless mistake, it's making careless mistakes all the time and having to spend hours. I mean, one of my coaching clients spent 3 hours writing an email recently because they just had to keep on checking and keep on checking, worried about perfectionism, worried about making that mistake. So technically, if you want to change the language from we're all a bit ADHD to, yeah, the traits of ADHD do exist throughout society, that is technically true, but it's a horrible phrase, isn't it? We're all a bit ADHD because it immediately takes us to that place of, oh God, here we go again. Someone's going to try and attack me or diminish me.
I think talking about that, I suppose it's the same with labels, isn't it? So since I've only recently been diagnosed with ADHD, and it's been a bit of a wild journey finding out formally, as you will know, because you've actually been diagnosed as an adult as well, haven't you? But because we're talking about that, we'll get to that bit. But I think what I'm finding really hard.
There you go. Try and have a conversation.
I know. Well, welcome, guys. But no, I think what I'm finding hard is like what Alex says about, oh, we've all got a bit of ADHD or whatever. And people going on about labels, like, oh, everyone's got a label these days. And I know you'll have spoken about this loads. And I'm finding it really difficult. And I was trying to explain the other day to
my husband, wasn't it?
To your husband, actually, Alex, that I actually think labels are pretty good, right? Because I feel like it's a way of us communicating with other like-minded people. It's a way of finding each other. Do you know what I mean? So then, and then I went a little bit far, didn't I? Because I was like, and then if we all find each other, then the world will realize there's more of us, and then it'll have to change. Because like, I obviously went too far with it. Well, I didn't, because I do actually believe that.
But it does seem like everybody's getting a diagnosis at the moment, doesn't it?
It does, and there's a reason for that. But equally, I think it's really important, Lisa. I don't think that's going too far. Because actually, for us to get, we've now got, I've seen now in the last 3 days from the charity, 3 different specific NHS areas who've sent out guidance saying we will no longer refer people, adults, for ADHD assessments. We're not doing it. And what the first area to do this, I think it was York and North Leeds or something, said, we don't think it's ethical to add people to a 10-year waiting list. But apparently it's ethical to not allow them to have a referral for ADHD. So actually, the more of us that talk about ADHD, the more of us that share our experiences, the more we amplify our voices, it will eventually get us towards that societal acceptance, which the best example I can think of to compare it to is chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, I'm old enough to remember in the 80s and 90s, that was called yuppie flu in the newspapers, and it was downplayed, and it wasn't a real thing, and it's an excuse for people to not work. And now it's accepted as a medical condition. We are in that yuppie flu ADHD stage of ADHD becoming accepted. People just think, oh, there's loads of people, that want a diagnosis, and why should they get support at work, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's understandable, because if you've not really heard of it and all of a sudden it's everywhere on the news, it can feel like, well, this didn't exist last week. And it really did. The The second point I've obviously forgotten because I've got ADHD and poor working memory.
Oh,
So
I love
Alex.
this.
So Alex said it does seem like everybody's getting a diagnosis, and that's true, Alex. But the main reason is that around between probably 4 and 5% of all adults have ADHD, and 90% of those roughly are undiagnosed. So since the pandemic and the rise of TikTok and the rise of celebrities, if you like, coming out and saying, I've got a diagnosis, all of a sudden people are aware it's a thing. And that big 90% of what is around between 1.5 to 2 million people are suddenly realizing, oh, there's a reason that I've had this past. There's a reason that I may have had relationships fail, or gone from job to job, or really struggled and had to mask and hide some of the sides of myself, because now I know that it could be ADHD. And if you're in that situation and you want help, then you'll look for help. So what we've seen in some areas is a 700% increase in people asking for a referral. And obviously the NHS isn't resourced for this. In fact, a lot of the healthcare workers aren't trained for it, and believe all the old myths that it's just naughty boys running around at school, that women don't have it, that you can't have it if you're successful, etc. And it's by kind of sharing good information that we can make that change. But you're absolutely right, it does seem like it's trendy in gravity, but it's just because you couldn't even get a diagnosis as an adult in 2008 on the NHS.
And that's what I was just going to say. I guess if all of a sudden we make this discovery that there is something out there that's affecting so many people, then all of a sudden all these undiagnosed, never diagnosed, never even considered a diagnosis people are running to sort of go, oh, I think that could be me. Yeah, I guess
Do you
I can
know what
see
I
that.
find hard about it? And like finding more and more people with it and watching TikToks and Instagram. And it's like, in one way, it's amazing. Like you saying that, then I've forgotten the next bit. Like, you don't know the relief that kind of gives me, because we've been doing this podcast now for years, and we used to do something called the sober sessions. And I remember I'd be fully involved, right? Really passionate about something. And then I'd be halfway through talking about it. And then I'd be like, what am I even talking about?
What's my point?
But I was so passionate. And then it would just go. And then I started thinking like it was
We
menopause.
thought it was menopause,
So
didn't we?
like, oh my God, it must be menopause. I will open a menopause group. That's what I'll do. So it just like makes.
Can I tell you, she has a
much.
menopause group and does nothing in it now?
Yeah, because I don't even do anything with it. But then that comes for me with like, and I'm only just learning this and learning to accept it, which I suppose is unmasking as well. Because I've done these things all my life, and then I've ended up feeling so ashamed that I've lost interest in things, or don't want to do things anymore. Go on, you're going to have to. You did that, and now I'm distracted.
Well, no,
so I need to...
apologies. On our podcast, we do that as a silent cue that I've got to say something, and Sam, my wife, will always go, "Yes, Alex," if she sees his hand go
Yeah,
up.
because that's it. Everything's gone out of my brain because I've seen it.
It's interesting because you mentioned labels earlier, and actually, I got challenged recently on social media because somebody put up a post saying, we shouldn't be medicating ADHD. It's a label, etc. And actually, the labels that I've given myself over the last 40 odd years of useless, unreliable, forgetful, can't believe that I disengaged with that. Why can't I do these things? Those labels are far more damaging than having a label of, oh, there is a neurological reason that I do those things. And I was just, dying inside when you were talking, Alex, about how Lisa might not be engaging in that menopause group, because the things I've set up, like even our online community for the charity, which has 7,000 people on there, I've been on there twice in a year, because it wants the kind of the big picture, right, set up. I've done this big picture thing. Once you're actually engaging with it regularly and doing the finer detail stuff, my brain just goes, nah, move on to something else, do something else that's big, a big picture, a big change. And I struggle to just keep that engagement.
And I think
it's actually
what I'm
really
learning
interesting.
is to try and not be so ashamed of it and understand myself. But then I have this feeling, and because it is a new diagnosis, and so you'll have heard all this before, I have no doubt, but like about excuses. And I heard somewhere said, like, it's not an excuse, it's an explanation for things. And I was like, oh my God, that made me feel so much better.
You've quoted that.
I feel like
said that.
but I do feel like I'm slowly unmasking, which means I'm changing a little bit. And I'm worried for the people around me that I've pretended to be this person for so long. Does that make sense?
It does, Lisa. And I'm gonna step into my coaching shoes and just gently challenge your language and say that don't worry too much about other people, because you deserve to be you.
Yeah.
You, the you that's the real you, the you that for years you may have hidden or camouflaged or masked certain behaviors. We do this, and it often costs us, our mental health, our physical health, relationships. And as you go through that process of emotionally accepting you have ADHD, I was just speaking to someone this morning that got their diagnosis last week, and they said, as many of us do, I feel like I've tricked the psychiatrist. I feel like
Yeah.
I've just tricked them into ticking some boxes, and I'm still rubbish, but maybe now I tricked them. And it's, these are medical professionals with 15 years training of doing this, and they know what they're doing. But we do struggle with that identity. And as we start to unmask, it's interesting you mentioned friendships, because what can happen actually is some friends can kind of mourn for the friend that you were, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. I have social phobia, which is an anxiety disorder, which is more common in ADHD. And it's not about being in crowds, it's about being in groups of people where you might be judged, or where you've been judged in the past. And that means there are some environments where in the past I would go and, well, let's face it, not be sober, because the only way
Yeah.
I could get through that event was to be not sober. Now I understand this is part of my ADHD. I either don't go and just say, well, actually, no, that's not a safe place for me to be in that anxiety, and
Yeah.
explain it. Or to go and still don't be sober, which isn't great, ideally. But the thing is, that's still the people pleasing side of me that's worried about what friends think. And I have lost some friends, some people who, preferred the party James that would, just go out all the time in massive anxiety, having mental health crises because of doing this, but that I was a more fun person to them. So you
Yeah.
do sometimes see a change in relationships, but honestly, it's about you and you living your valid life, Lisa, and feeling like, as you do have the right to, that you should be able to be yourself in any situation where you want to be yourself.
I think
Thank
that's
you.
what's kind of changed you and me, hasn't it? Because like we're very, very different anyway. Like just forgetting any sort of diagnosis,
Mm,
anything, just very different people. We're just very lucky that we gelled on day one some 40 something years ago, 30 something years ago, and have remained that way. But I guess that's what's in some ways stopped me even think when people say it to me, oh, and even Lisa said, you definitely do have some ADHD traits, Alex. And I guess what stopped me even thinking about it any further is because I'm so far away from Lisa. Like, I am the most organized person you will
mm,
ever meet. I am very academic. I can concentrate well. But oh, yeah, it's obsessive. It's obsessive, like ridiculously obsessive, and the
mm.
preservation and self expectation on me is just unreal. So sometimes I think, well, maybe not, because I don't seem to fit into those categories. Does that also happen?
Yes, because we are diverse as a neurodivergent group. And this is one of the big issues with ADHD. And actually, it's an issue within our community, is that people often think that their ADHD is ADHD. And the most obvious way this manifests itself, and it's a very controversial area, is the whole superpower debate. That some people see their ADHD as a superpower, that it has helped them get to wherever they want to in life, and therefore, instead of saying, for me, it's a superpower, lots of people say ADHD is a superpower. Now, it isn't for everybody, because for many people, it's a disorder, it's a disability, it causes impairments on a day-to-day basis. For other people, if you're in the right environment with the right support, you can fly. We are very diverse. The impairments, the symptoms, the traits, the strengths, the disabilities vary from person to person. And actually, being very organized, having built coping strategies to be organized, to be in control, is something that particularly women do more than men. And it's one of the things that can sometimes be a barrier to getting an assessment or a diagnosis, because I'm not saying you as in
Yeah,
you,
yeah, yeah.
Alex. I'm not trying to diagnose you or even influence you in any way, but some people can develop these strategies to deal with ADHD, which can then mask the symptoms. And it's one of the issues with getting an adult diagnosis is, if you look at those questions, the diagnostic questions, the very first one is for inattention, and it makes careless mistakes or lacks attention to detail. Now, if you answer that question in the context of, well, actually, I check everything twice. I make sure there's no mistakes. I have to do this because, you know, I've built this coping mechanism. You might say to that question, well, rarely, I rarely make mistakes because I always
Yeah.
check things. Whereas if you think of the unmasked you and think, right, well, if I didn't check everything twice, would I make careless mistakes? Or if I didn't check something so many times, you know, because of perfectionist traits or because of fear of criticism, would I lack attention to
Yeah.
detail? And sometimes we have to ask ourselves those diagnostic questions as if we are the unmasked us rather than the us that spent 20 or 30 years developing ways to deal with these issues, often in the workplace.
That
Which
makes
is hard
sense.
because I suppose you don't know that you've got an unmasked version. I think that's what
No.
shocked me the most.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's something you'll have to think about, Alex. But like, you just think it's you, you know,
Yeah,
like,
you just think that's how I am. But
yeah,
it's
that's how I
hard to
am.
know whether it's trauma based as well, because one thing for certain is I was surrounded by a lot of trauma as a child. So then you start to think, well, maybe I've not got ADHD. Maybe the fact that I'm a bit of a perfectionist, or maybe the fact that I want to interrupt everybody is because I need to be heard because I wasn't heard as a child. That kind of thing. You know, you find an excuse, you find a different reason.
Yeah.
The trauma thing is really interesting, and again, controversial, largely because of Gabor Mate's work. His original book, Scattered Minds, was well received, and it wasn't a bad book, but he's gone on since to say some things he'll probably regret. And what we know is, when it comes to adverse childhood events, which can be traumatic, is they do increase the risk of developing ADHD. Normally, depending on your age, because the symptoms of ADHD have to be present before the age of 12. So often it's, did the traumatic events come before the symptoms? So for example, as a child, I was hyperactive all the time from, you know, the age of 3 or 4. So it's clear I had ADHD symptoms. I didn't have any childhood trauma, but if I had, then I could probably look at the sequence of that and say, well, did the symptoms come before the trauma, etc. We also know that people with ADHD are more likely to get trauma at some point and to be diagnosed with PTSD. But the thing that really complicates it is if you look at the symptoms of trauma and the symptoms of ADHD, they pretty much cross over. They're pretty much the same, apart from 1 or 2 symptoms. So this is why people get misdiagnosed, particularly women. And this is why some people genuinely believe that trauma and ADHD are either mutually exclusive, which they're not, or always linked, which they're not. Some people will have both. In some people, one will lead to the other. And it's just this slightly complex thing. So you're right, some of those symptoms definitely can be due to trauma. And we know that actually trauma can cause lifelong ADHD-like symptoms. So to separate and kind of tease that out,
It's a bit
it
messy,
does
isn't
make
it?
it really, really messy and really complicated. And you can understand why some people, when they've waited years to get an assessment and are then told by somebody, well, you know, this could be trauma, you might think, well, can I have a bit more than that? You know, can I have some direction, some further assistance? Because I need to know for my identity and for getting support. But it is this mess of other conditions that ADHD looks like, and particularly for women, that they often get diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression. These are all things that commonly women, but also sometimes men, are misdiagnosed with rather than ADHD.
Oh, got me thinking, but about a family member actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
you know, speaking. Oh, go on.
Oh, and I was just going to say, are there any common things, you know, like is there anything, any list where all people with ADHD have these traits?
The best way to there isn't. So there are 3 flavors of ADHD, 3 presentations they're called, based on 2 sets of diagnostic lists. The first set are the 9 diagnostic symptoms of inattention. So that's things like making careless mistakes, being forgetful, struggling to focus on, you know, long and boring tasks, starting things, you know, with lots of excitement and then, you know, letting them drop soon afterwards. And then you've got the second set of symptoms, which I think will eventually will be split into 2 separate lists, but that's hyperactivity and impulsiveness combined. And they're kind of joined because they come from this lack of cognitive inhibition, or the ability of the brain to stop us from saying things, doing things, thinking things, or moving. And with those symptoms, it's a bit more nuanced, because a lot of the hyperactivity symptoms are internalized, like feeling like you're driven by a motor, struggling to engage in restful activities, you know, struggling to just sit still and be quiet, if you know what I mean. Now, Because of those two sets of symptoms, there's three presentations. Combined type is issues with both inattention and hyperactivity, impulsivity. That's my club. Inattentive type are just enough symptoms to be diagnosed with the inattention side, but not enough symptoms to be diagnosed with hyperactivity and impulsiveness. And then this really small group who are just hyperactive, impulsive type. So what that means is, if you ever see these kind of posts on TikTok or Instagram saying, if you do these 5 things, you've got ADHD, if one of them is fidget or hyperactivity, then that's misinformation, because if you are purely inattentive type, you probably don't fidget, or you might not be externally hyperactive. So to have a kind of a core list based on the diagnostic symptoms, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
There are some shared issues around ADHD is effectively an executive function disorder, and executive functions are higher level thinking skills, which we evolved to be able to organize, prioritize, plan, regulate attention, regulate our risk, our working memory, time management. And the ones that seem to be relatively core are time management. So for many of us, we are time blind. That means issues with estimating how long it takes to do something, or reproducing the amount of time it took to do something in the past in the same amount of time. And sometimes even seeing time as a linear thing where there's a me in the future. Issues with working memory, which is the shortest form of short-term memory. Whereas someone, for example, you meet someone, they say, hi, my name's Dave. And within 5 seconds, you're thinking, what was their name again?
Yeah.
Because we haven't been able to process that. So I have
that's
to
scary. That's really scary. I had a friend. Sorry to interrupt you. I see what I mean. Sorry to interrupt you, but I've got a friend, and I'd known her for well over a year. I met her through the church, and she's actually
I'm
called
so
Louise.
sorry, but you are going to speed this one up, because I know you've told this story so many times already.
I'll go quick. She's called Louise, right? She basically said to me, oh, she's called Marie like me, but she was talking about somebody else. And Marie is either her first real name, whatever. But I then looked at her and had no idea what her name was. And I mean, no idea. I've known this woman ages, and I'm thinking, what are you called? And it's not Marie. I know it's not Marie, but what are you called? I couldn't get past it. I had to go to the toilet and search her in my phone book.
Yeah. And it's that, and again, that burning shame that we sometimes feel that we can't remember someone's name.
Yeah.
The working memory as well. There's two types of it: visuospatial, which is your surroundings. So if you put your phone down on a surface and think, right, I've put my phone down, and then 15 seconds later thinking, where's my phone? That's a lack of visuospatial, your surroundings. And then there's the stuff that you've heard or read, your kind of auditory or read stuff. So like somebody's name, or somebody reads out their phone number while you're getting your phone out, and then you go to put it in. We almost all say, sorry, what was the number again? Because our brain was dealing with some information. So working memory is very common. The other stuff, again, non-diagnostic, not in the criteria, but most people recognize this. The first, and this is a really biggie, is rejection sensitivity.
Oh, I really wanted to talk to you about this. So yeah, keep this bit long if you want.
Well, ding. Yeah. So nobody likes being rejected or criticized or ignored. It's not nice, is it? But with ADHD, it hurts more. So if you are rejected or criticized or ignored, or if you think you've been rejected, criticized, or ignored, even if there's objective evidence that you haven't, or if you think you're going to be rejected or criticized or ignored, it burns. It causes physical symptoms, palpitations, like stomach pains, as well as complete emotional distress. And most adults with ADHD have this to some extent. So this can be everything from, you message a friend and you see 2 blue ticks on WhatsApp, but they don't reply, to you write an email to somebody and they email back, pointing out that you've made a mistake, to, things in my past. I left the job. I used to work at Yates's Wine Lodge when I was doing my PhD. And because I was the biggest person there as a barman, my job on a Saturday night was to wheel in the big tables to set them up for Sunday lunch. And I did this for the first 3 weeks. And then I had a Saturday night off. And when I came in on the Sunday and we had the team meeting, the landlord said, and I can remember these words, I'd just like to thank Steve for bringing the tables in last night. He did a really good job. And I instantly quit, because he'd never thanked me for bringing the tables in.
You've been doing it for 3 weeks.
I get it. I totally get that.
And I was so hurt. I immediately quit. And he said, why? And I said, oh, I've got a virus. And he said, which one? And I said, they don't know, because it's all I could think of in the moment. to get out of that job because he'd never said, thank you, James, for bringing the table. And that sounds ridiculous. But again, the
No,
guilt
it
and shame we
doesn't.
feel about this, you know, it can make us end relationships or not engage with relationships. It can make us leave jobs, you know, lose friends. It's a really powerful thing. And then related to that, because nobody actually thinks of emotions with ADHD, but they're a big part of it, is something called emotional dysregulation. About 70% of adults with ADHD have this to some extent, and that's having emotional reactions which can sometimes be out of proportion to life's events. So an overreaction to a small event or an underreaction to a big event, or they last much longer than one might expect, so long duration, or they're not societally acceptable in rabbit ears, which is a construct. And that means that sometimes, again, that can cause friction in an interpersonal relationship or a workplace relationship. So whenever you kind of read about ADHD, it's really important to accept, I'm not going to have all the things that this website or this resource says, because we're all different and we don't have all the symptoms. But there are going to be some things which are non-diagnostic, which often that's when people go, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, the time blindness, the working memory, and yeah, I have struggled with rejection. So sometimes it's actually listening to the stuff that isn't in the diagnostic list that makes people think, oh, no, I need to look into this in a bit more detail.
The RSD I've been looking into a little bit because I never it's one of the worst things, I think, for me. And through what I've realized in the last few months is my whole life, and I've had a very kind of, my mum is ADHD, not diagnosed, but like she is. And I can see that it comes from that. My youngest daughter has been diagnosed. She's 18 now and only just been diagnosed herself. So we've kind of done it together. One of the things I massively regret is not knowing sooner, because I could have helped her so much. And it's nice that we can do it together and we understand each other so much. But I do wish that I'd known sooner. But the RSD, me and her were talking about it the other day, and she was saying about it with her boyfriend. I've definitely ended relationships because of this, as a form of protection. And just the other day, I'd messaged my boyfriend. I'm laughing, but honestly, and this is what I've never told people ever. And these are the things that I've masked, is how much it would affect me. I'd just laugh
I know
about
all
it.
of this. We have
Well,
conversations.
I literally messaged and said, they've got a new ice bath and sauna thing at the gym. So I said, oh, shall I book us on the ice bath and sauna experience at the gym? And he messaged back with like, yeah, can do. And I was like, yeah, can do. Yeah, I'll never be inviting you to anything ever again in my life. In fact, you'll be lucky if you walk through this. I didn't say this to him, but this is what's going on in my head. The palpitations, hours, James, all day I was affected by this. So much so I'm thinking, that's it. He don't love me anymore. The relationship's over. I'm going to have to end it, because it's just like everything has got to a point where he's taking me for granted. And all day it lasted. And then I tried to explain it to him later. And this is how it went. I said, so I've been reading a little bit about RSD. Oh, what more letters? Like, that was it. I swear to God, I don't know how I've even looked at him this week, because I'm still fuming about it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot in there. We do tend to catastrophize with RSD and assume the worst case scenario, and that's because we often have something called a negative internal monologue, and that means that we overthink lots of things. So, particularly, let's see if this resonates with you. If you're worried about something at work or a conversation, we can lie awake all night going through every possible permutation of that conversation, so we're fully prepared for the worst outcome, and then nothing bad happens.
Yeah.
And that kind of catastrophizing that it's the worst case scenario is often a response. It's what's interesting is if you look at why people say we get RSD, and there's a lot of not rubbish, but let's say bad statistics. You'll hear statistics that children with ADHD will have received 500 times more criticisms than children without, and there's not a lot of evidence of this, but around 50% of children with ADHD have been rejected, compared to about a quarter of that children without ADHD. A lot of it is because the way in which our brains develop slightly differently includes multiple areas. Now, the emotional areas of the brain, largely a part called the amygdala and a part called the hippocampus, they work together to spot situations that give us negative emotions and then add context. Now, these parts of the brain work differently, and that means that things that are involved in fear and rejection and negative emotions can become overwhelming. Now, normally, in a non-ADHD brain, the rational parts of the brain, the outer parts, will control those emotional parts and say, whoa, calm down. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. Maybe they haven't rejected you. Let's look at this rationally. But those two parts of the brain aren't as well connected in ADHD. And that means those emotional parts just become overwhelming and predominate your thoughts. So all you can think about is the negative outcomes and the rejection, and it's going to happen again. And I can't believe they've said X, Y, or Z. And it, just trying to do anything else when you've got those feelings and those thoughts in your head is really difficult because it's all consuming.
So surely then on the basis of that, it's not that more people with ADHD are affected by this. It's just that it affects them so much more that they're able to recall it more. So obviously, do you know what I mean? It's like if somebody without ADHD gets what could be perceived as a rejection by somebody with ADHD, they're not that, excuse the phrase, that asked about it. So they've moved on. So when they're ever asked about it, no, I haven't been rejected, or no, I haven't. Of course, it's going to come out more in somebody who recognizes it more, isn't it?
It isn't, and we have to say, you have to be honest, rejection sensitive dysphoria isn't recognized as a medical condition, as a lot of stuff that's related to ADHD isn't recognized as a medical condition. And it's interesting that you said about people without ADHD will move on. This is one of the really difficult things, particularly as an ADHD coach, when I'm working with people who've got RSD, is there's 3 stages to it: the before, during, and after. The before is the racing thoughts and intrusive thoughts, and I'm dealing with this situation where I'm going to be rejected, even though you don't know that you are. And and that can be challenging, but you can prepare with breathing techniques and other things. The during of an RSD episode is really difficult to deal with, because what do you do when your brain is screaming, oh my God, it's the end of the world? But the after part is where ideally seeking clarification, by asking, not I've been rejected, but so why did you say that? What did you mean? Often shows that it's not a big problem. It's not a big rejection, and allows us to move on. But seeking that clarification exposes you to more rejection sensitivity.
That's the thing. Like
Exactly.
in my case there, he said at the end, like, I love stuff like that. Of course I'd come with you. So that's kind of like gone, but my whole day had gone in my mind. And I think what I've realized in the last few months is my first instinct is always a disaster thought. Nobody in my life would ever know that.
No, because you're extremely positive, but that's going back to the masking thing, isn't it?
Yeah, so what I've realised is that we're a mask. And I used to get really, really fucking offended when people spoke of toxic positivity, right? Because I
for a long time, this, James, a long time.
I had practiced so hard, or people would say, oh, it's all right for you because you're always positive. And I'd think, you do not know what it's taken to get here, and the hard work and the effort of learning meditation, practicing all these things to try. Like if my daughter rings me, I've got a little granddaughter who I love, and she'll ring me and she'll say, oh, Bella's not well. My first reaction is unspeakable, right? Of what I think is going to happen in this situation. What comes out of my mouth is, oh, no, is she all right? Right. Okay. Don't worry. We can deal with this and we can deal with that. But what's going on inside is so different. And that's like been a massive realization for me that I am actually finding really hard, because I don't want to unmask my positive side because I like it. So I think learning to do that. I need a coach, don't I? That's what I need you, I think.
Can I ask something else on the back of that as well? Because there is another masking thing. So you talked before about time management and time perception. So Lisa, people would say, is very, very good at being on time for things and really good. And everybody will say that I'm on the minutes. Now, I promise you, my whole life, I've fully believed that I'm really good at time management. Right. And I'm just going to tell you why I now know I'm not, because I spent life in school, in college, in university, being told how to go to there, go on that bell. And then for 20 years, I was a teacher. When I stopped teaching, oh my God, I've never been late so many times in my whole life because there's
Mm.
no bell to tell me when to move. I don't know what I'm doing. Lisa, on the other hand, will be early for everything, but that's because she
Like-
knows she's going to be late, so she massively overcompensates. And something might be happening at 1 p.m. Lisa's got to leave at 8. Like,
Yeah.
a whole day revolves around being there by 1 p.m. I'm the other way. I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I've got this to do, that to do, that to do. And then at 10 to 1, I'm like, shit, I'm on the way, on the way. I'm always late.
Listen, there's so much in there. I'm so glad you've said that, which helps actually explain kind of time blindness. I'm the same as Lisa. I have to be everywhere early, and that causes challenges with my wife. Sam's got ADHD and autism, and her approach is very much no. We'll leave at a normal time. So the airport's the best example for me. If I'm not through security with about 2 hours to go, panic, anxiety, fear. Like we went to Birmingham Airport, which had a lot of issues this summer with queuing, and I broke down, had a meltdown, crying my eyes out because we were in this ridiculously long queue, and I was convinced we were going to miss our flight, which is relatively inconsequential in the big
But
scheme
even
of
if you
things.
did, yeah.
Yeah, but if you
Exactly,
were going to
but-
miss your flight, you'd proper deal with it. You'd be like, boom, boom, boom.
Exactly,
done.
crisis mode. Yeah, crisis mode when you don't have to make decisions and think about it, we're good in. So actually, time blindness either means that we're kind of pathologically early for everything, or that we are often late. And what you said, Alex, I thought was really interesting, in that if you look at how ADHD kind of manifests through the lifespan, and particularly as its challenges become more prominent as we go through the education system, when you've got a structured environment, which is be here at this time, and there's auditory reminders, and you're following children to a class, it's easier to do these things. And then as you start to get into FE or HE, when you've got lectures at a set time, but you've got to manage yourself, that's when people generally start to struggle a little bit more with these things. So having that structure and developing coping strategies around time can be a form of a mask. And this is where masking and coping strategies kind of merge, because healthy masking, if you like, might be, well, I've developed a way to make sure I'm on time. That's not necessarily hiding your symptoms. It's a coping strategy. But the masking side of it is often for example, hiding the impact it has on your emotions, or apologizing for things that aren't necessarily your fault because you want to be seen as you fit in. But both of those kind of examples, being early and now finding that you're late, are just two different manifestations of it.
Do you know what I find with mine? And this is the issue, that it's not that I'm late for things. Well, no, it is, because I am, but it's that I'm busy doing everything before I can't switch off unless everything I intended to do before I went there is done. And I mean, cannot switch off. So, like, I won't go to bed till I've done all checking my messages, done this thing on my app. I won't, and everyone around me will say, stop doing that. You just need to switch it off. Just put it down. Oh, just put it down. Are we all right? That's not easy. I can't just put things down. I have to finish.
So again, I'm going to do my best to not try and quasi-diagnose anybody here. But many people with ADHD have autistic traits.
I knew you were going to say that. I've been telling her this. I have been telling her this for so long.
For anyone listening, that was Lisa that said that, not me, obviously. So
I've diagnosed her.
So it's what we know is that people who are neurodivergent are far more likely to have more than one neurodivergence than people who
don't
aren't.
tell me I have both. That's awful.
I'm not telling you you've got either. I'm being very, very careful with my language, Alex. So, and the statistics are actually ridiculous. So it's around 60% of people with autism also have ADHD, and around 40% of people with ADHD also have autism. Now, most of those are undiagnosed. But equally, people with ADHD often have the traits of autism. So some traits, not all of them. And people with autism can have some traits of ADHD more than the general public. So therefore, that completism, that need for something to be finished, is what we would call an autistic trait. Doesn't mean that you're autistic. It's just an autistic trait in some people with autism. Because again, people on the autistic spectrum are all different. And as an example, again, with my wife, Sam, one of the struggles she has, she's in burnout at the minute, she's off work, partly because her brain will not let her finish until something's finished. So when she's working, she would work late because everything has to be finished. And I would say, just do it tomorrow. And her brain, it's almost like, no, I've got to finish it now. It's got to
No,
be
I
finished now.
argue with my husband. No, we fall out over it because he will literally say, Alex, just put it down, just leave it till tomorrow. And I'm like, no, I cannot go to bed with this not done. I'll sleep like a baby when I'm in bed, but no, it has to be done. And you know, like there's quite a few examples of that. I'd be more inclined to agree that I've got autistic traits than traits of ADHD.
Yeah.
More inclined. Like I really struggle to read emotion on people unless they're explicit and say I'm sad. Like
Yeah.
I'm very inappropriate with my reactions to things.
This is why we've kind of worked so well together, I think, because we've like, even with emails, you know, when you said that before.
Oh yeah, the emails.
I'm so glad I can say it because it's been playing on my mind the whole time. When you said somebody took 3 hours to write an email, like that is me. I will go home and I'll be like, oh my God, I've worked so hard. This is different since I've started the medication, by the way. But so before the medication, I would have thought I would have worked so hard and I'd look and I bet I'd sent like 3 emails, but they have took me that long to do and to like, it's just really hard work. Now, when we started Be Sober and we offered a lot of support. So
Are you going to talk about my emails now?
Emails would come through and it'd be somebody reaching out for support, right? So I look at it and I think I can read in between the lines. I know what they're trying to say. I know how they've started off. I probably can tell you what the childhood were like from this one email, right? I'm like, they need this. Alex, so blunt. And I'd be looking at a sent emails going, oh, you can't say that. Like they've reached out for help and you're just like, dumb robot. And so over the time, we've kind of helped each other out where I'm like, right, I think they need this by this, Alex. And actually, she's helped me shorten my lengthy emails that I would never read myself, but I'm quite willing to send down.
Basically, what happens now is I put the factual bits down and then Lisa fluffs it up and makes it sound compassionate.
And then I get fully offended that she says I fluff things up.
Yeah,
and
she's massive.
Like
she's massively
for me
offended.
now, she's saying she's the clever one and I fluff things up. So that do you see what's happening? It's
totally not meaning that though.
I do still think you guys can't see the notes I'm making.
I don't think I want to.
When we're talking about this. Well, you mentioned not picking up on emotions. That's called alexithymia. And alexithymia is common in both autism and ADHD. And it's a reduced ability to know which emotions you're feeling, sometimes physical feelings as well, to be able to know the difference between hunger and thirst, or to be able to describe a pain. But also people who are alexithymic, if you show them different facial expressions, here's a happy face, but don't tell them it's happy. Here's a sad face, but don't tell them it's sad. People who are alexithymic are less able to pick the right emotion for that face. And therefore there's so much which could be one or the other, which is actually kind of quite common when it comes to emotions. And the email thing, my God, again, when we were answering emails to our charity, which got to the point there were so many, we had a whole team, but obviously people with ADHD might, struggle with 1 week. So Sam was handing a lot of these emails and writing, pages of information back because she desperately wanted to make sure everything was in there to help this person. And my approach is far more like Alex's, which is, thanks for your email. Here's 3 things. Bye. Because I that's just the way I communicate. I don't have the time to do those things. Whereas Sam, being ADHD, has to kind of fight both the need for completism, the increased empathy that she has, which is common in people on the autistic spectrum. Yeah, Lisa was. And alongside kind of all the other challenges that she's got. And this is why I think it's so fascinating, because we are all different again. And we need to accept that in our community before we can get people outside of our community to accept it, because there are so many people that will say, no, that's not ADHD, or no, that's not autism, or you can't say this. I mean, I got pelters to the point where I actually, this is quite dark, but I actually got to the point of attempting suicide last Neurodiversity Celebration Week because I put a post up about autism, which garnered equal praise and criticism, because I used the term autistic spectrum condition. There are different names for autism: autistic spectrum condition, autistic spectrum disorder. 50% of the respondents were, don't call it that, it's this. And 50% were, I'm really glad you've called it that because that's what I like. But all I noticed was the negative ones, and all I could focus on. And I was at a time where I was burnt out and tired, and it really just put me in a dark place. And we can't kind of agree as a group of people based on our lived experiences that we're all a bit different. And some of us act in, way A and some in way B, but we are all neurodivergent.
It is really fascinating, really fascinating. And it's a shame we haven't got loads more hours, but I do want to touch on one other thing.
Lord, what he's thinking about it isn't.
No, I would like to talk for longer. I've got more to ask you. But one thing that we do need to touch upon, because obviously it's the Be Sober podcast.
Yeah, I was.
Can we just link? And I know I've skipped away now, but can we just talk a little bit about the link between why are there so many more diagnoses with people who are ex-drinkers, and B, why are people drinking so much anyway? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll start off with a personal reflection because it might help people a little bit. So I'm not proud of my history of substance abuse, but I have used substances since I was 14 years old, and I've relied heavily on cocaine as my main substance. I was never a drinker. I was very lucky that it just never agreed with me. Now, I just thought that I was kind of a partier. I liked going out and partying, etc. But I didn't realize I was self-medicating. And it was only at my diagnostic interview when the psychiatrist said, "Do you use substances?" And I thought, well, I'll be honest. I said, yeah, I tend to use, cocaine and cannabis. And the psychiatrist said, "How do you feel on cocaine?" And I said, just calm. I can listen to people. Everything's a bit quieter. And he said, the stimulant medications will work for you.
Yeah.
And I then realized that I was using substances to either keep myself calm because I wasn't kind of hyper and paranoid and etc. on cocaine. It was, I could just sit quietly and listen to people because it was controlling the internal hyperactivity in my brain. And equally, there's this weird thing that is absolutely not a real diagnosis, but Alex, my colleague on the podcast, came up with this, and we call it domestic anxiety. And it's a little bit like the witching hour of 5 o'clock when you get to that point during the day when you think, just sitting watching the telly tonight, oh God, my brain can't deal with just sitting down and not doing anything because it's directing me to do stuff, but it's also not letting me do stuff. And sometimes to dampen down that anxiety, people turn to substances. So just from a personal angle, that's certainly why I spent many years and many tens of thousands of pounds, abusing and using substances. If you look at kind of the evidence and why it happens, it comes down to a part of the brain called the reward center. And in an ADHD brain, this is the part that probably works most differently. So when we get exposed to something that makes us feel good, whatever it is, whether it's a food, an activity, then the reward center of the brain acts on this and gives us the motivation to engage with it again, because that was pleasurable. I'll try and do that again. And we know this from a basic science level that if you give laboratory rats access to water or water with cocaine in, they pick the water with cocaine in. And then if you repeat that, they'll go to the cocaine. But if you enrich their environment with lots of other options, they don't. So it actually shows you that as long as there are options to give you reward, you won't always take what's called the maladaptive one. So this reward part of the brain means that if you look at the addiction cycle, now, no models are correct. Some models are useful, but the addiction cycle of 3 stages, first being exposure or intoxication, the second being withdrawal and its negative effect, and then the third being preoccupation and anticipation. What we know is that for that first step, exposure or intoxication, that people with ADHD are more impulsive, are more likely to take risks, are more likely to give in to peer pressure, and therefore more likely to be exposed in the first place. Then if you look at that second stage of the cycle, the withdrawal or the negative effect, well, the reward center of our brain, which is seeking dopamine, the reward neurotransmitter, because it doesn't work properly, will be, if you like, screaming out for more of that, more reward. That was rewarding. I want more of that. And then that final stage of preoccupation or anticipation, again, is based on reward. So we know there's 2 types of reward. The reward you get when you're waiting for something, and the reward you get when you experience something. And actually the reward you get waiting for something, anticipatory reward, is stronger than the reward you get from engaging in something. So the thought of, I will use that substance tonight, or I will use that substance tomorrow, is a massive driver of motivation to do whatever I can to get hold of that substance so I can use it in the future. And this is one of the reasons, if you look at the statistics, that we see so much substance use disorders and also behavioral addictions as well. So, you know, with alcohol, we know the lifetime prevalence of any alcohol use disorder in ADHD is almost 50%, which is ridiculously high. We know around a third of people with ADHD engage in heavy drinking or display patterns of binge drinking. We know that adults with ADHD are 50% more likely to develop substance use disorders than people without ADHD. And if you look the opposite way, so if you look in people who have an alcohol use disorder, then around 20% of them probably have ADHD. So you've got this massive crossover driven by increased exposure when we're young, a reward system that reinforces engaging with that substance, and this almost sometimes desperate need to get through the day, to control that internal noise, that anxiety, the symptoms that are causing us issues. And if a substance temporarily relieves that anxiety or all those feelings, but pushes it down the road, people will turn to that as a coping strategy.
Yeah, I guess it's to quieten the busy brain, isn't it, as well? You know, like...
Really is.
Yeah,
it's worrying as well, I think, isn't it, with the amount of people and the time it's taking for people to get diagnosis now. I suppose this is where your charity as well can really help. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because I know the amount of time since I've said no about my diagnosis, I'm inundated with messages asking me about it and where people can get help. So please, will you let us know?
So when I found out I probably had ADHD about 6 years before I got diagnosed, because my co-host on the podcast, Alex, got diagnosed and phoned me up and said, I've just been diagnosed with ADHD and you're way more ADHD than I am.
You sound like us too.
Exactly. But then this is what we do, you know, between close friends. And I laughed and I did the online test and stopped laughing and realized, oh, okay. And then did nothing with that information till I got diagnosed. And then impulsively, and Lisa will recognize this, set up a charity, you know, did everything, the website, the bank account, the charity constitution, got everything in place, and then left my wife to look after it, to do most of the admin, because I'd done all the big picture, and then it was like, oh, I've got to engage in the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, I have to get left with all the crap bits. I do, honestly. You name any documents and forms, appointments, emailing anyone that she don't want to do, I just have to do it because she'll go, oh, I've got this. In fact, you know what, James? It happened with you. I'll just tell you what happened with you. Oh, there's this amazing guy. I've just heard a podcast. We've got to get him on the podcast. We've got to get him on the podcast. He's called James Brown. All right. That's Lisa's fucking input. That was it. I had to find out who you were, where you were, how to contact you, get you on.
I sent you his Instagram.
Oh, yeah.
I did. I was sending you his Instagram and I was like, we need to get him on the podcast. So she said, why don't you send him a message?
Can I just tell you, she did not send me your Instagram.
Messaging you.
She did not send me your Instagram. She sent me a screenshot of you on somebody else's Instagram.
Amazing.
Actually, it was far more complicated than that. If she'd have sent me your Instagram, I wouldn't have had to go and look for you everywhere.
See, everything you've just said just reminds me of the way I've acted over the last 2 or 3 years, with a big idea and then bringing people on board and then just, getting them to do the stuff that I'm maybe not so good at. It's having ADHD has been described by me as like having an internal PA that's on ketamine, because the internal PA that's meant to do all the organizing just isn't. It's not turned up to work, and now all of a sudden you've got to do all the organizing. And
that is so good. That is what it's like.
If you've got a wonderful friend or colleague like Alex that can do those things, we do sometimes lean into that and allow that as a coping mechanism. But anyway, got diagnosed, set up a charity called ADHDadultUK, all one word. It's the wrong name, and that's just because Alex registered the wrong name on the web address. It was meant to be Adult ADHD UK, but he got it the wrong way around. So the website is ADHDadultUK, and there's lots of resources on there, lots of guides.
I love that it's the wrong way round.
It's so ADHD. There's
Yeah.
an online Discord community where there's about 7,000 people on there. It's being called a chaotic squirrel rave, and it is. But it's also a place where lots of people have actually met their first friends, and you can go and you don't have to code switch. You can be yourself, and there's body doubling channels and geographical channels.
Brilliant.
We also, a bit later on, set up the podcast, the ADHD Adults podcast, which is terrible. Don't listen to it. But it does deliver a different kind of topic each week when we can actually record it. And that's the ADHDadults.uk. And then finally, we also set up, and I've actually re-engaged with this, Lisa, you'll be proud.
Oh, go on.
An evidence-based online magazine for ADHD. So there's an American online magazine called Attitude, which is shit, frankly, because it's largely just people sharing their opinions, which are fine, but people see it as being fact and evidence.
Yeah.
So we set up an evidence-based ADHD magazine called focusmag.uk, where there are articles with links to the science behind explaining different parts of ADHD. So if people want to learn more, then either go to the charity website, ADHDadult.uk, or focusmag.uk for more information.
Where can people follow you on Instagram so they don't have to come to our Instagram to look who you are to then find you like I had to do?
So I am ADHDadult_James, or ADHDadultJames. If you stick that in, it'll find me. But the podcast is ADHD Adults, and the charity is ADHDadultUK. All pretty simple to find on Instagram.
It's been an absolute
pleasure.
We'll put
the links on the thing anyway.
Yeah, and thank you for coming on. Honestly, we've been a long time waiting for this one, haven't we, Lise?
Yeah, mainly because it should have been the other week, but
yeah. All right.
No, I'm kidding.
ADHD
don't go off
shaming.
thinking you've been criticised now, James. With when we just said how amazing it is. But
I'm lucky.
We have a lot of people on the community who have had a recent diagnosis or who are looking for a diagnosis, and I know they've been waiting for a podcast to talk about this. So it's been a long time coming in that sense as well. You know that. We have really wanted to get somebody on who knows their stuff to talk about this. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Just one last thing, which I obviously forgot, and it's RSD related. We've Alex and I've got a book coming out next year called ADHD Unpacked. And obviously the book's written and we've gone through all the process, and it's now at the point where they've done the PR. And I didn't think for a second until that Instagram post went out that I would get RSD, and then it was just massive. Oh my God, we've just announced that I've written a book, and everyone's going to think I'm a complete dickhead and they're going to hate it. And of course, there's been a really nice reaction, but that RSD of putting yourself out there and saying, here's something that I've created was just, oh my God, it was crippling.
You know what, Lisa? That reminds me of you as well. Do you remember with Be Sober, you always just wanted to be in the background?
It's really hard, isn't it? Because I love being in the background and I don't want to be there.
Then she gets pissed
off.
But
then if Alex gets all the praise for the work that I've done in the background, it really offends me. And I'm like, I did all that.
But then I get offended that she thinks she did all that.
Oh my God, it's like you're in my podcast at the same time. So when we started our podcast, I wanted to just kind of be the host. So I'll just introduce it and let other people speak, because I didn't want to put myself front and center. And then even when I was writing, scripts with all of the bits of the evidence in, I didn't want to be the person reading it out. So it created this dynamic where people thought I was just some bloke, and that my colleague Alex,
sidekick.
Yeah, exactly. and my colleague Alex, who actually became known as the psychoeducation monkey, that he is an expert, but everyone kind of thinks that he is the expert, and I'm just a dickhead that turns up with a microphone and does the introduction.
You know what, James? I do something, and I don't know whether you relate to this at all, right? But say we're doing something together, and I'm going to give an example. Alex is a PT now, and she does like Be Fit in the morning, and she will introduce it. And I haven't done it for ages. This is just an example, but she would introduce an exercise, right? And I spot somebody going. So I then go, "How do you do that again, Alex?"
He knows how to do it.
And I go around, and that's an example, but I do this a lot in my life. Now, I run as well as Be Sober, I run a really successful business, a family business. Yeah, I walk around acting like I don't know anything because I'm so worried that other people don't know things and the world is not explaining it to them properly, that I ask all these questions. And now I've realized that that's what I used to do when I was at school as well.
Mm.
Like I just can't believe how much it is coming to. It's going to be a journey, this, isn't it?
It's the heaviest penny that ever drops. When it drops and you can suddenly kind of put that lens or those glasses on and look at the past and think, oh God, that's why I used to do that. That's why that happened. That's why, I've become the person I am. And right back to the start when you were talking about identity, and also Alex, when you talked about trauma, it's really important, I suppose, as a final note from me, that you are the cake, not the ingredients. Whoever you are in life, we often worry about, well, which parts are my ADHD and which parts are just me. It doesn't matter. You are two wonderful people doing wonderful work, but we sometimes kind of try and dissect, well, is that my ADHD or is that just a talent? And fundamentally, it kind of doesn't matter, because if you're doing something you love and you're good at it, then it's just amazing.
I love that. Thank you. We're
Yeah,
all
I'm glad we didn't end the first time we tried to end now.
Oh, thank you so much. Just stay on for a minute. But yeah, thank you for everyone listening. And we'll put the links in the description as well so people can find you and get the help that they need.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, James.